Good morning. This is the Blaine's World podcast that can be heard each week or found on Facebook, YouTube, LinkedIn. You can also hear us on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. You can get more information, listen to previous shows on our website, www.blainesworld.net. I'm your host, Blaine Greenfield, and I'm here in my Zoom studio in lovely downtown Fairview, North Carolina. And each week, we focus on positive news and information about people and organizations in both Western North Carolina and throughout the country. And toward that end, it's my pleasure to introduce a friend of mine, Marilyn Ball, with a show called Speaking of Travel. And Marilyn, you can wave to all your fans and friends who might be watching this.
Thank you, Blaine. Lovely to be here.
It's my pleasure to have you. And Marilyn, as you'll see, is just kind of this amazing woman who does a little bit of just about everything, I think, Marilyn. And I should mention that Marilyn Ball is the host of iHeart Radio Show and global podcast, Speaking of Travel, which people want to listen to, which I do oftentimes on Saturday mornings. At what time? Is it 10?
11 o'clock.
11 o'clock. Okay. The author also of The Rise of Asheville, An Exceptional History of Community Building, a series of stories tracing the bonds of community that gave rise to Asheville today. She's the founder of 12 Marketing, with over 20 years marketing and public relations experience in the tourism, economic development, and hospitality industries. And Marilyn, I found out something just before that you also, I guess, in your spare time, you've now become a tour guide.
That's right. I do tours with Asheville by Foot, Kevin Fraser's downtown history tours. I do them every Sunday morning at 10 o'clock.
Okay, well, let me ask you this. It's kind of cool that you do all these different kinds of things. You grew up where?
I grew up in Washington, D.C. It was a time of greatness in Washington, D.C. It was a wonderful place to grow up.
And when you grew up in Washington, D.C., and did you go to school in the Washington, D.C. area as well?
I did, yeah.
Okay. Did you always know you wanted to be this travel podcast guru at some point in time in your life?
Well, Blaine, when I was growing up in Washington, D.C., I always knew that I wanted to talk. I was always that kid that, by the time I was 4 years old, I thought my name was Shut Up. But I just have to say that I love talking to people. And when I think about it now in retrospect, maybe I wasn't thinking exactly that. I wanted to be a host and interview people. And yet when I trace my life today, it seems like everything that I was gravitating towards was about storytelling. Everything. When I was in college, when I worked for an ad agency, when I started my own company, everything is when I did the school newspaper at UNCA, where I went to college, it was all about storytelling. So, it's manifested into what it is around travel, which is such a universal language that it makes sense. I feel like I'm in my purpose almost right now.
Also, one of the things I love about listening to you, both in terms of the show and when I've seen you elsewhere, is you're this marvelously inquisitive person. It's just that, you'll be interviewing a guest, and whatever it is, you'll pull out some like interesting stories about them. And it's just really cool that you can do that. And it looks like you have fun doing it as well, do you?
I do have fun, and I do want to say that takes a lot of research to do that. It's not like something that just, I know this guy or I've looked at his website. And that's a part of what I love too, is really getting in and doing these deep dives into people's lives and their backstories and finding out. I want to be able to be the person who has a conversation with them and they're talking about other things than what they always talk about on a podcast or when they're interviewed for a newspaper article. I want to be different. And to tell you the truth, at the end of the conversation, if somebody says, I really enjoyed that, Marilyn, that was great. That was a great conversation. Or if they say, wow, what a great question, coming from somebody who's asked questions all the time, I feel like I'm good at this. I get it. I like these people.
And it's funny you said that, because that's always, I think, to me, the biggest turn on when somebody does say that, that they were surprised. Or when I get, Marilyn, when somebody has fun, with me, because I guess you get this also that some people have never been on a podcast before and never been on a radio show and they're nervous. Do you get that?
Absolutely. Sure. Yeah. And on the flip side of that, I have people who are so polished and so well spoken that I feel intimidated. I feel a little humbled. I feel a little nervous. I can hear it in my voice even that, oh, I'm here with the big ones, and I don't, and it's just me. In fact, I'll just tell you a really funny story. One time I had a privilege of interviewing somebody who was quite a big celebrity in that industry. And we got on the call, the recording, and I said, I want to just tell you right up front, I'm actually a little nervous interviewing you. And he says, what? All week, all I've been thinking is I'm going to be on Marilyn Ball's show. You're nervous, I'm nervous. And then it just broke the ice, and we were friends.
What gave you the idea to do the show?
Well, I went out to Portland, Oregon in 2013 to what is called the World Domination Summit. It's a guy named Chris Guillebeau. He had written a book called The Art of Nonconformity. And I went out there kind of searching for my tribe. Like, I wanted to find people who were interested in travel, because I love to travel. And their focus was on travel, adventure, and service. And all of that together kind of spoke to me. So I went out there, I met people from all over the world. It was 3 days of really inspiring talks of people who had quit their day jobs and found their purpose and were doing what they love. And I came back to Asheville and I thought, man, I have got to get into that mindset. Well, lo and behold, I'm at a little dinner party and there's somebody talking about having a radio show about food and wine for this small community-based radio network. And I said, food and wine? Who's going to listen to a show about food and wine? And I thought, what if I did a show? What if I had a show? And it was about travel. And I could talk to every person I know in Asheville has some kind of story. They were in the Peace Corps, or they went to Israel and lived on a kibbutz, or whatever. There are stories abounding on travel. So he gave me a chance to do that, and I did a pilot, and I interviewed my friend about the Peace Corps, and I've been doing it now for 10 years, every week.
And what's cool about that, and I think you use it as maybe a recommendation for other people, is to just kind of have an idea and then run with it. The worst that could have happened is you could have done, I guess, the pilot, and it could have bombed, and we wouldn't be talking today. But just because you had the guts to just try it, and then it just never ended, So.
And every person I talk to, Blaine, to be honest with you, has a similar story. They might not know it, but because they said yes to an opportunity, it put them in the situation or the position or the path that they're on now. And they look back and they say, wow, if I hadn't taken that risk or stretched out of my comfort zone or gotten on that plane or whatever, those are where these wonderful stories are coming from. So, and everybody's got them. I always ask people, did you travel when you were a kid? And what I get is, no, I lived in the Midwest. We went to, the next state over to visit grandma. I never saw the ocean until I was 18 years old. And now this person is, a digital nomad living all over the world. And you just never know. But that story of traveling to grandma's gave them enough curiosity, like you said, to find out there's something more out there than just in our pasture.
Well, one of the cool things I think about what you do in your show is the point, as you were saying, that everybody does travel at some point in time, and they may not think about it or the experiences, but they seem to have fun when you're on your show talking about it, And I guess a lot of them, realize they didn't have a story to tell, but you help bring it out.
I've had that happen many times, and I'll tell you the most amazing journey like that is when somebody is telling me about their childhood and their early childhood and what it was like for them when they went to China for their semester abroad in college, and then how they came back and they did all the things they were supposed to do. They got a corporate job, they did this, they did that. But now here they are. The reason they're on my show even is because they're doing tours to women Buddhist Tibetan nunneries up in the Himalayas because of her experience in China that came back to her all those years later. Like, what am I doing here? I need to be there. I need to be in that environment. And then say, I never made that connection until right now.
When you were younger, did you travel with your parents?
I didn't. My parents, we lived in Washington, D.C. All we had to do was travel over the D.C. line, and you were in another country, and it was so diverse. But we would go to all the national monuments. My parents were immigrants from Russia. They were first generation in the US. They were living the dream, and all around them was this incredible history, and they wanted their kids to know about it. And so we would travel in the car to Gettysburg or Mount Vernon or someplace that always, in fact, I'll tell you really quick, all those times I went to Mount Vernon looking out on the Shenandoah Valley. One day I was coming out of my house up on the mountain here, and I realized, I think that was foreshadowing for me, looking out on the Shenandoah, and yet I'm living looking out on the mountains that join that mountain range. It all, to me, just makes perfect sense.
So you were with your parents. So you were traveling, though, kind of locally, but it was within the area of Washington. You went to college. Did you then start traveling beyond that? Have you traveled extensively, and to where?
Well, my first actual trip by plane was when I was 14, and I flew from Washington, D.C. to LA
Okay.
to where my aunt and uncle lived. And so that gave me the bug. Like, now I want to get on a plane. I love this. And so I didn't travel much until actually as an adult. I took the other route. I got married, had a family, created a career here. And it really wasn't until I was an adult that a friend of mine invited me to go on a trip with her. She was a travel agent at the time, to Italy. And she said, all you have to do is show up and I'll lead the way. And so for almost 2 weeks, we traveled through Italy. And that's when I knew, okay, now I'm ready to really hit the road.
Speaking to you, I don't know if that friend of yours told you this, but I could also see you putting together trips. I don't know if you've done that or thought of that, but boy, do I see that as a natural. Travel. You have the show, invite your listeners to travel with you. Do you see yourself doing that?
I do. In fact, I have on my website, speakingoftravel.net, a place where you can sign up for the Speaking of Travel Travel Club.
Right.
And the intention of that travel club is to create a database and then put out newsletters and get inquiries. And I've had a number of times where somebody will come to me and say, why don't we put this trip together under your umbrella, under my umbrella? So we've tried it a couple of times, but remember, we're just coming out of that 3-year almost pandemic when people weren't traveling at all. So my intention and my goal is to be able to travel. I actually just purchased a new piece of equipment that is a handheld, almost like a sound board in your hand with stereo mics that I can take with me and travel and be able to do my show. So I'm prepping one step at a time.
Because just listening to you, I could see that being such a natural, and you'd be so good at it. Just travel with Marilyn, and anywhere you want to go to Italy, you name it, Marilyn will take you there. And with all your contacts, I think that'd be fun. It's ironic we're talking about this. As I said, I learned off the air that in addition to all the stuff you're doing, you also meet people in downtown Asheville, or you take people on tours in Asheville. And talk a little bit about that.
Well, I actually just started doing that last year, and I never really thought of myself as a tour guide. However, I've lived here since 1977, so I certainly came at a time that was a historical landmark time in Asheville's history, the late 70s, early 80s. And I wrote a book about that those stories that were unfolding during that time, these grassroots stories that were happening, created in my mind an intentional community. People were doing grassroots things to create community around Appalachia, the land that we loved, and being out here in the being able to create a community. So I went out and interviewed actually the people who were instrumental in making those big epic changes happen. in our town, and the book was published. And so fast forward a couple of years, and Kevin Frazier, who himself is a historian, a Nashville native, he's written books about Asheville, has a company called Asheville by Foot Walking Tours. And he invited me to be a tour guide. And so I meet people from out of town who are paying to go on this tour at 10 o'clock. They only do it at 10 a.m. in the morning every single day. There are different guides. And I walk around and tell the history, starting with the pioneering time, through the Vanderbilt time, through the Great Depression, through Save Downtown Asheville. And people love it. They get an opportunity to hear from an insider, local, what Asheville is really about versus what they're seeing in the media coming out of an ad agency.
It sounds like fun, because not only is it fun, but you also get your exercise in then.
I
too. Is that
do.
right, on Sunday mornings?
It's perfect for me. And I
How
get
lo-
to talk.
How long is the tour?
It's about an hour and 45 minutes.
Okay. And if people want to sign up, specifically if they want to sign up for you, you do your tours on what, Sunday mornings, you said?
Sunday morning.
And how do you find out information about that?
It's Asheville by Foot Walking Tours. And I think that's ashevillebyfoot.com.
Okay. Is that also, if people want information, is that also on your website as well?
Not on my Speaking of Travel website.
Okay. It's just if people want to find out about you, so they can find out about you through this one site. They can also, you mentioned your website, and talk, how do they find that, your website?
My website is speakingoftravel.net, and there is a link on the homepage where you can, it says for past episodes of Speaking of Travel, click here. That will take you right over to my platform, my own podcast platform, and all my shows are there.
Okay, and the website again, just repeat your actual website is what?
It is speakingoftravel.net.
And people go there, they'll find out about Marilyn, or they can find out all your past shows as well. Anything else? They could also mention they can sign up for this email list or something.
Yes, it's the Speaking of Travel Travel Club. And I send out newsletters and give travel tips and other information, links to some of my shows.
And in terms of your shows, so you've been doing this now 10 years. You do a show just about every week?
I do one every week. Yep.
So that's, let's see, 10 times 50. Wow, you say about like 400 or 500 shows over the years.
Yes.
Put you on the spot. Do you have a favorite show you've ever done? Or one of the favorites?
Well, you're certainly not the first person to ask me. That's an easy question.
Okay.
My favorite shows, and I'll always say it because it's truly was one of the monumental shows for me. There's an organization called the Honor Flight. If you're familiar with the Honor Flight, it is
Oh yeah, sure.
Opportunity for veterans to take an entire day to be honored to Washington, D.C. from the Asheville Regional Airport. And when I found out about the Honor Flight, I did a couple of podcasts with the person who helped start it and some of the veterans who have been on it. And then they invited me to be a guest on the Honor Flight, and being able to do my show with the veterans who were on that flight and be able to come back and see thousands of people honoring these men and women who have served our country and never were. I mean, I grew up in DC during that era. I know what it was like. And to be from Western North Carolina and come back and not be respected and treated kindly, there's nothing like it. It was the most moving experience and the most moving show that I've ever had.
And just as you talk about it, I'm getting a chill, just to listen to it. That's not Asheville based though, is it?
It is, yes.
Is it? It was started out of Asheville?
It's called the Honor Flight. You can Google it and you'll see it right here in Asheville.
Okay, because I want to put it down. I'd love to do a show, on that as well.
I think you should. Absolutely. I'm happy to connect you to the
please,
people
would you?
with that organization.
What an exciting story, and for you to have gone on there. How often do they do the honor flights?
Well, up until COVID, they were doing it a couple of times a year. And they have, when I went on, it was a Legionnaire. And this was before COVID, because then they stopped. And I think they just started back up again. But what happens is that they have a escort too. So it's the veteran and somebody that they can invite to bring with them. And they leave from the Asheville Regional Airport and they go to Washington, D.C., where they're greeted in these big coach buses, and they have police escort, and they're taken down to the Lincoln Memorial, and they have the honor guards, and everybody is there. And then they can go out to see their own memorials, the Vietnam vets, the World War II vets, the Korean War vets, they're all there. And then they go to Arlington Cemetery and they see the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier. I mean, it's a big day where they're honored, honored, honored all day long. It's just amazing. And then everybody gets back on the plane and they come back to Asheville, and Asheville Airport and the honor flight people have put out notices for people and to be there, and thousands, marching bands, church groups, they're all there. And these people are a lot of them in wheelchairs, wheeling out through the Asheville Regional Airport while people are cheering them on. It's just amazing.
And they, as well, they should be honored. It's just, what a great story, and, what a great trip that must have been. Other favorite, talk about your show, but in general, other favorite destinations of yours. So you mentioned you've been to Italy with your friend. You went to Washington, returned to your home. Any other memorable travel experiences you've had?
Well, certainly every single travel experience is always going to be memorable, because you come back a changed person, even if you've just gone to Mississippi. But I have been very fortunate to go on a number of trips to Cuba. I've been to Cuba a couple of times. I went way back in the day when you really weren't supposed to be going to Cuba. I went with a group of Canadians, flew in from Canada, and asked the immigration people to please not stamp my passport. It was quite a rebel thing to do at the time, but it was my introduction to get back out into travel, and I did it. And since then, I've been able to go back again. I've been to Spain and Portugal. My son-in-law is from South Africa, so I've been able to travel there. It's just amazing, though, Blaine, the people who, especially over COVID, you would think that a show like mine would end because it's a show about travel. But in fact, all the people who had been traveling and couldn't travel, maybe they were sitting in their parents' basement somewhere in Connecticut where they'd been traveling the world, suddenly were going on these inner journeys, and they wanted to talk about what it was like not traveling. So it became a different kind of conversation. And then what ended up happening is that people started speculating, what is it going to be like when we can travel again? And that dialogue started to open up. And it really started to gravitate people to my show who wanted to talk about conservation and ecotourism and mindful travel and being able to have more experiential travel, and to change the paradigm of what travel looked like before to being something that's a little bit better. And those are the places now that I really look at where I want to visit. I have because of my guests and the information they're bringing to the table, I have a much better idea now what questions to ask on the destinations where I'm going. What are they doing to save the planet? What can I do to help their economy when I'm visiting there? So it's a much more experiential type of vacation and type of journey. I just came back from Costa Rica. I used that model. I'd interviewed people in Costa Rica who were doing incredible conservation, ecotourism efforts. And I came back and realized I need to do a series on this. I went down there. It was everything and more that I ever even expected. And I came back and said, I need to do a series. Now I talk to people about Costa Rica all the time. So you can see destinations now are, oh, I went to Spain. Now it's more like, oh, I went to this little fishing village where I met the local people and I was able to eat at their table and eat their local foods. that's the way I like to travel now.
By the way, that must be very exciting for you too. And I imagine it happens that you'll interview somebody on a show, and then do you eventually meet them at times?
In fact, I recently went to New York. I met quite a few people that I had interviewed and was able to go on a New York City behind the scenes TV and movie tour because of somebody that I'd interviewed. I was invited to a lovely meal with somebody. I'm hoping this September I'll be going to Italy. I have a whole connection now in Italy of people who I've interviewed. People just want to be globally connected now, Blaine. It's like how Asheville was in the 70s. Now that's how the whole world is.
Do you
It's
speak
really
Italian?
great.
Do you speak Italian?
Just a, you know, I took
Okay.
Italian in college, thinking someday I'm going to go to Italy, and I always have to refresh when I go back.
And by the way, I should ask you, sometimes a question that comes up in my mind, how important is it for a person to have a knowledge of foreign language if they're going to a foreign country?
Seriously, most people in this world speak English. We're the country that is
Right.
deficit in language, unfortunately. So in most places, you can definitely talk to other people because they understand English better than you understand their language. It's always a good idea to at least brush up and know something. But I can tell you this whole thing, talking like this, I've talked to people who have communicated quite, as by hands, just using their hands. They've been able to communicate. So you're fine wherever you go.
Well, excepting too, to make it even easier for people now, they have, which is incredible. A friend of mine was showing to me, you just take your phone and speak English and they'll do Italian or vice versa. Isn't that amazing?
It is amazing,
You
and
know,
it's doable.
have you done that yet?
I have, yes.
Okay, just it's hard to comprehend. You also mentioned something too. It just, if you could explain it, you said mindful travel. What is mindful travel?
It's basically what I was saying about paying attention to uh, the environment. We talk about a carbon footprint. Well, what is a carbon footprint? How do we really know how we can offset that? Well, there are ways. There are ways that you can offset the carbon footprint. There are ways that you can help other communities grow. Just thinking how you can be kind to people, to yourself, to the experiences. I heard from a couple of people that I've talked to were giving some travel tips, and one of them said when he gets on a plane now, he always brings a big bag of candy and he gives it to the flight crew when he gets in. No strings attached. He just wants them to know he's thinking about them. So I've started doing that. And I can tell you it's made a huge difference. Immediately, they're smiling. You can feel the vibe is changing a little bit.
But
Everybody feels a little kinder.
as you're saying it, I'm saying to myself, that's a great idea. Just to be nice to other people, I guess that you take the initiative rather than wait for them to come to you. I just love that idea. The in terms of travel, also, do you have any suggestions, Marilyn, to make it easier for people? Because all of a sudden, and my wife is even more so this way, she doesn't like flying anymore. She doesn't like to come. We didn't have it years ago, a hassle. Any suggestions you have to make travel easier for people?
Well, I have felt lately like I've coined the term pack your patience. Tina Kinsey and I from the Asheville Regional Airport say it now. She and I do a series together. We've been doing it since the March 2020 when there was a lockdown. Tina Kinsey from the Asheville Regional Airport and I spoke every week for 10 minutes while she gave updates on what was happening at the airport and in the aviation industry. It's very historical, I think, to have that kind of documentation. But now travel coming back out of the pandemic is rather chaotic, and especially if you're traveling in and out of the Asheville Regional Airport anytime soon. They're getting ready to put in a brand new tower. which they haven't replaced since 1960. So that's important for our region. And they're getting ready to do a brand new modern terminal that'll make it state of the art for us. But in the meantime, with traffic on 26 and a lack of parking anyway, not to mention construction, it's going to be pack your patience. If you want to fly in and out of the Asheville Regional Airport, know beforehand, it's a privilege. Okay.
Good point.
You're paying money. You're going on a trip. That's a privilege. So think about making sure that you have enough time to get to the airport. Make sure that you have enough things to do when you're at the airport. They try to make it as comfortable as possible. All airports now are making it comfortable because it is a given. You have to be at the airport 2 hours before a flight. Don't think you can go less. Even if you think, oh, it's the Asheville Regional Airport, I'm telling you, my friend, plan on 2 hours and another hour to leave in case you get caught in traffic. And that's going to be true pretty much around any airport. And even when you're on a road trip, you're going to have to pack your patience. So when I talk about mindful travel, I think it's mindful for us to recognize if you want to go someplace, then you need to do your due diligence. You need to know, have apps on your phone. You have to be a little savvy these days and connected. And it takes a learning curve for those of us who are like, I just want to get on a plane. I don't want to have to do homework ahead of time, but you do. But let me tell you, the value in all of that to get to that destination and to suddenly find yourself in another world is a life-changing event for all of us. And remember, life is short. Don't postpone joy.
It's funny you say that because I'm thinking back to my experiences with Asheville Airport. And when we got here 15 years ago, it was great, 20 minutes to get there, in and out, whatever. And I guess I love that, pack your patience. You got to account for the 2 hours. Talking, Marilyn, reminds me of my folks who used to love to travel, and they were ahead of the curve. You'll get a kick out of this, that they were the first ones ever to bring sandwiches on board. And they go to a deli, great little deli near where we used to live, bring these big sandwiches, and people would always make fun of them when they got on the plane. They say, how come you bring this food? Then they'd have to wait 2 hours to the airline to serve a frozen TV dinner. And they were eating these delicious sandwiches that's, I guess, being prepared, but nobody used to do that. Remember, they were just the first ones to do it, but they were ahead of the curve.
They were, but I can tell you today, you get nothing on the planes pretty much.
Right.
So not only do you pack your patience, but pack your lunchbox. and people do. I actually am finding that that's kind of a fun part of the travel now, is that as long as it's not stinky stuff, but people are pulling out their little snacks and their little bars and their water, and it's almost like a little cafe now. You're sitting in a chair in the air and people are having a little culinary delight. So,
but again, you prepare for it. But like you said, yeah, occasionally I'll see they'll sell stuff on the plane, but I wonder if anybody even gets it. The key is to plan on it in advance. Any other recommendation? If people are planning to travel now, like I said, COVID restrictions have been lifted somewhat. It's easier. Any other recommendations to tell people about traveling that they should think about before they take their trip?
Well, for one thing, they need to make sure that they have a budget, because a lot of times you get someplace and you haven't done your homework on what the exchange rate is or how much you're going to spend. Even if you're just traveling domestically, I'm telling you, you can go into another state. Gas is higher, food is higher. I'm sure people who come to Asheville are a little shell-shocked when they come into a restaurant, like, are you kidding?
Right.
So know what your budget is. There's nothing worse than feeling like you've gone on a vacation and you're in debt when you come home. So I always tell people, get prepared, have a little travel fund, put a little money aside that just earmarked for travel. So that way, when you get someplace, you know what. And oh, well, here's another thing that is extremely important. And again, these are paradigm shifts. It's never going to go backwards. It's not like I'm giving you these tips and then next week it's going to be like, oh, never mind. It's always going to be like this from now on. every place you want to go visit, there's probably going to be a lot of other people who want to go visit there. So you go online and you get your tickets in advance. You make your restaurant reservations in advance. It's not as spontaneous. You can still be spontaneous and you can set aside times to get lost and find new places. But if you want to earmark what you are really wanting to do, make sure you plan that in advance. Get your hotel in advance. Get set up. That way you have an itinerary and you can be like, we can be flexible because we know we have a show at 8 o'clock and we have lunch reservations downtown at 10 o'clock or whatever. Then you can be spontaneous, but planning ahead, getting your tickets, getting your people are like, oh, I'll just find a restaurant when I get there. Not so much. I hear it when I take people on tours. Oh, well, we were going to go to XYZ restaurant, but they're booked until May.
Two final questions. If folks want to get smarter about travel, other than listening to Marilyn Ball's show on the radio on Saturday mornings at 11 o'clock, any best way to get smart about travel?
Well, I just want to make sure people know that the radio show, this is what makes my show unique, is that it is a radio show and it does air on Saturday mornings on WWNC, 570 AM. The show is also a podcast, so it is uploaded to my podcast platform where you can listen anytime, anywhere in the whole wide world, 24/7. So I just want to make sure people know they can go to my website, click on past episodes, they can listen till the cows come home. So with all that said, what was the question again?
So just aside from listening to your show, any other things that folks should do to get smarter about travel?
Absolutely. There's this thing and it's called the Google. Have you heard about that? Google.
The Google machine.
Google.
Okay.
Yeah. So if you go to the Google, you can type in virtually anything. Like, how far is it from Lisbon to Madrid? How far? And then you can see. And then you can actually build maps. I've heard about this, where you can, like in the olden days, we had a triptych from AAA.
Right, remember?
And they would fold out. Well, now
and they used to have something called maps also, remember?
They did, and you'd have them all laid out. Well, now you can just go on your phone or your laptop or your whatever, your pad, your pod, and you can put in anything, whatever you even want to think about, you can put in and find the information and then create your own itineraries. So we are at a stage where using the internet and being able to do research just on the simplest things will make a huge difference. And also, I just want to make sure people remember that you can now find places that are giving back to the environment, who are doing good things for their communities, who are doing sustainable work and have a wonderful vacation anywhere in the world. So being able to kind of add that to your Google search is going to be good for the planet, good for you, good for the people. It's going to make everybody so much happier.
It ties into kind of a final question I'd like to ask you. And it's something that I actually miss about travel. I'd like to comment on it. But the fact that it used to be something called travel agents, and I used to love travel agents, and I guess there's still some travel agents floating around, or you can find some travel agents.
Yes, you actually can. It was an unfortunate time in our lives that we had suddenly no travel agents. They were just gone. And then, of course, with COVID, people weren't really traveling. So people who had started kind of doing that. But now, I'm not kidding, Blaine. I'm telling you, there is somebody for everybody. If you're looking for a concierge to give you an itinerary in Italy, you can find one. If you're looking for somebody who can plan your whole trip, like, here's my trip, go put an itinerary, get my plane flights, do everything. I'll just put in a plug here for my buddy, Mark Gordon Smith. He has private Italy tours and he puts together personal itineraries for people. So if you call Mark Gordon Smith at Private Italy Tours and you say, my family and I are going to go to Italy and we want to go to Venice and we want to go to Rome and we want to go to Florence, he'll put together your tickets, your itinerary. If you want to go to museums, he'll get you tickets to that. Everything, all you have to do is show up.
That's my kind of travel,
That's my kind of travel too.
Which is great. And it's, I guess I'll ask you one other final question. But if people want to get a feel for travel in various countries, talk about the difference between hotels, nothing wrong with hotels, but as opposed to hotels versus Airbnbs or hotels versus staying at people's homes. I assume that can be done now as well?
Absolutely. Like I said, Blaine, anything your imagination can, even in your wildest dreams, imagine, you can do now. Hotels, again, it's doing your due diligence. Some hotels are in some places are the most awesome. That there are places that are castles that are hotels, right? So it's what you want to do. If you want to stay in an Airbnb, just Google Airbnb and put in your destination, and there's every kind of opportunity you can even imagine. So everything these days is totally around your personal preference, what you want to do.
And Marilyn, well, again, if folks want to get in touch with you, we'll talk about there's several ways to get in touch with you, but specifically the radio show again is on Saturdays, what time and where?
It's on Saturday mornings and at 11 o'clock on WWNC, which is 570 AM. And it is also podcast. So it's like literally a click to get to every single one of my podcasts. And I put a description so you can see who the person is and what we're talking about. And that way you can get an idea of who's on the show and what the topic is.
And also, again, one more time, your website?
It's speakingoftravel.net.
Okay. I'd like to thank Marilyn Ball for being my guest this Blaine's World podcast. I'd also like to thank my producer, Cappy Tassetti. We hope to see you somewhere, either up in personal, you and I in person, but also if you're listening or watching on Facebook, LinkedIn, Spotify, Apple, you'll find us. Thanks, Marilyn. You be well.
Thank you, Blaine, for having me.